as a result, when you choose from different grammatical patterns, you can choose to highlight something by putting it in the front, in the subject position, and you can background something by putting it in the object position, or even not mentioning it at all, or putting it in the circumstance position, right? Let's see. And when we do transitivity analysis, we look at three things, right? We look at the process, what type of process the writer or the speaker is choosing, right? The process refers to the verb, right? What kind of verb is he or she using? We look at the participants who are involved in the process, right? The actor, the agent, the carrier, and so on, right? And also we look at the circumstances, things that give you extra information about why, about when, about where, and so on, okay? And all in all, we looked at, this is from last time, okay? Not from this time. So all in all, we look at different, let's say, 6 different processes, starting with the material process, the process of doing, involving 2 main participants, actor, and then the goal. The goal is optional. And we look at the verbal process, mental process of thinking, behavioral process that is a cross between the material and the mental process, and then relational and existential. So we look at these processes, and we looked at 2 examples last time. So today we'll continue from this and look at what kind of interpretation we can get after we do the transitivity analysis. So I'll bring up the slide for today. Okay? So for today, after the quick review that I just did, we'll look at the interpretation that we can get. Okay? So last time I mentioned this in passing, so I want to stress it one more time, that in many cases, you might find more than one verb in a row, right? You might find more than one verb in a row, like tries, he tries to do something. So what do we do when we find like so many verbs in a row like this? So a general rule of thumb is to look at the last verb, okay? And so here is the material process. So we categorize it as a material process, right? Do something, instead of looking at the first verb. So you look at the last verb in a row, okay? And unless you have 2 different subjects, like he wanted us to know. So we have want here and wanted here, and then know. So in this case, we have 2 different subjects. He wanted, so that's one. And then know is another different process, which is the mental process with the us as the subject of know, right? Who knows? Us, or we know, right? So unless you have something like this, you should look at the last verb. But if the subjects are different, then we look at both of them, okay? So that's one point before we go on. So what's next? Now you can categorize processes into mental, material, verbal, and so on. Now what we'll do now is to give us some kind of interpretation to work on. So let's look at the material process first. So if you find material processes are the process of doing, right? Processes of doing. So what you have to do is to look at what the main participant might be. And the main participant is activated or passivated. Activated meaning someone who is acting with power. And passivated actors are actors who are not acting, okay? An activated actor is someone whose capacity for action, for making things happen, for controlling others, and so forth is accentuated. Last week we looked at an example from Twilight, right? And we saw that Edward, who is the main participant, the male participant, is an activated, right? An activated agent there. He causes a lot of things to happen, right? So that's one example. So you highlight, you accentuate. Accentuate is to highlight. So you highlight the capacity or the power of that person, that agent, right? Action processes foreground agency and contributing to the representations of power. people who can act on other people or act on other things have power to do that, to cause things to happen, right? And on the other hand, a passivated actor might display an actor as powerless, so having no power, just like Bella in the example that we looked at last time. She trailed through life in that red dressing gown, moving slowly, moving slowly. So material, she moved languidly about without any kind of energy languidly, right? And she sat upright and quiet with wide open eyes. So these are material processes, but the actor is not an activated actor, but a passivated actor. So you can say that your interpretation could be that the actor here, she, and she, the actor here is a passivated actor, and she doesn't have a lot of power. Okay? So that's one interpretation. And then for material processes, agency can be backgrounded through the use of the passive voice. Like one civilian was killed. When you use the passive voice, kill is still a material process, right? Because it's a process of doing. So he got killed. Here you foreground the goal, right? The civilian is foregrounded, being placed in the front. But the by prepositional phrase here can be omitted, right? And it's optional. So in this case, without mentioning it, you can say that the writer, if not mentioning it, the writer is backgrounding the agency who killed the civilian. Okay? And even more backgrounding can be achieved through the use of a one participant material process. And for example, one civilian died. So died here, you cannot have an object, right? Let's see. The difference between die and kill is the fact that both involve someone becoming dead. But die is intransitive, right? You cannot say he died, someone. You cannot do that. So die here has no object. An object is not possible. But kill here must have an object, like to kill someone. So when you use die, the end result is the same. But when you use kill, there must be an object, almost always, unless you say, something like, what do you do for a living? I kill, like that. That one might be an exception, but generally speaking, kill must have an object. Okay, so if the headline of a newspaper says the boy died as the gun went off, so this is another way of representing the same event, right? Compare that with the police broke into a home and shot a 5-year-old boy as he slept in bed. So this, if you choose the word die, it's just like it's happening by itself, right? Instead of the police killed the boy and so on, right? And the gun went off, it's just without any goal. Instead of saying he shot the gun at the boy and so on, right? So you can see different representations. And as I said, transitivity is just a way to choose from so many different choices, syntactic choices, right? Let's see. Next is the mental process. So what kind of interpretation can we do when we see a lot of mental processes? Mental processes can reveal an internal kind of cognitive state of a character. And this can be used as the device that the writer could encourage the speaker, the listener, or the reader to have sympathy and to have empathy with that person. So, for example, the mother had worried since her son's regiment had moved into the region. Regiment is like soldier group, right? Soldier force. So in this case, then why do we have to know how the mother felt, right? Well, because the writer wants us to sympathize with the operation that the soldiers are doing, right? Same here, the soldier worried as he protected the civilian. Why do we have to know what the soldier was thinking at that time or how he was feeling at that time? Because the writer wants us to sympathize with the soldier that he didn't really want to do it and so on. the professor was bewildered, like was surprised, was afraid by students' essays. So now you know that the student's essays might not be a good one, right? So because he was bewildered, right? He developed fears for the student's progress and so on. So this is a way to say things that are not explicitly stated, okay? By letting someone enter into the character's kind of internal thinking process. And text not only tell us what we should or should not do or what has happened or not happened through material processes, but also indirectly tell us how to feel and how to take a certain stance on the issue by telling us what the characters are thinking. Okay? And verbal processes, if you see a lot of verbal processes, you can say that people who are represented as having a lot of voice, a gradient voice, maybe those who have the most power, right? So those whose sayings are quoted in a piece of writing are those who have most power. For relational processes, we talked about this last time. They allow speakers to present as facts what could be classed as opinion. Right? A lot of people have worries about immigration. Instead of saying a lot of people are worried about immigration. So this looks like it's a state, just a state that's existing, right? And there's no dispute, there's no gainsaying, there's no objection about this state, right? So it's a powerful way of representing that something is a fact. Okay? And for last one, existential processes can have the effect of obscuring agency. So obscure is making vague, right? The agent will be made vague because you just have a noun. There was an attack. We don't know who attacked whom or why the attack happened and so on. Okay? So these are all the interpretations that you can do when you see processes. On the other hand, circumstances are also important. Circumstances are extra information, right, that you get in prepositional phrases, adverbial phrases, and so on. But like children are killed in an assault, so this is a phrase, or children died after the war started, so this is a clause. So circumstances can come in many forms, and they can be used to provide context for the main part and may reduce responsibility for certain actions. Children killed in U.S. assault, for example. Here, it's just, this is the circumstance, right? In U.S. assault, this is a prepositional phrase, right? But you could actually kind of unpack this U.S. assault as a noun phrase to U.S. kills children in assault. So here we have the subject, whereas here in the prepositional phrase, U.S. is just a modifier. Right? So something like this could obscure agency, right? Because you don't have the U.S. as the actor there and then assault as the verb and so on, okay? Which you could have. Okay? And let's see. Like this, another example is violent protests as student or as tuition fees rise. Here, this is a circumstance, right? In the form of a clause with the subject here and with the verb there. And here, you can say that the writer backgrounds the circumstance so that it appears after this is the main actor, right? And in this case, we don't even know why tuition fees rise, right? Because the university management wants just to raise the fees and so on because of escalating costs or what. We don't know. So in this case, the writer wants to background or obscure the reason why there are the rises in tuition fees. But he or she wants to focus on the fact that there are strikes, there are protests that are violent. So this kind of thing you could read from circumstances as well. Okay? Just like this. The position of circumstances are important. If you compare two versions, after extensive reductions in government funding, the university management made severe staff cut and so on. This, if you put the circumstance in the front, it means that you are foregrounding the reason, right? What happened first, right? So you're foregrounding what happened. But on the other hand, the university management made severe staff cuts after extensive reductions in government funding and so on. In this case, you want to foreground who did it, right? So two different ways of representing the same thing, which could draw attention of the reader differently. Okay? Finally, I want to talk about abstraction and generalization. So sometimes when you read things, and we can see in the cases of university brochures that we looked at last time, right? People could use abstract actions, and these abstract actions are so non-specific. They are so abstract that we don't even know the details. Like if you read this, our primary role is to deliver, our mission is to be the strategic driver of economic development. To deliver the mission, it sounds good, right? To deliver the mission, to accomplish the mission, but do we know what exactly is done to do that, to achieve the mission? We don't know. We know only that they would deliver the mission, but how do they deliver it, or what exactly is being done here? We are not told. So this is what we call abstraction. Or university is a dynamic, forward-looking situation committed to being a center of excellence. So what is actually being done here? When you say that you are committed to doing something, right? When you say you are committed to doing something, what are you actually doing? Are we told of what they are doing? No, we are not. So this kind of thing sounds good, right? It's like a catchphrase that people always use, but actually we are not told as to, their role in doing something, right? We know that they are committed to doing it, but we don't know what exactly is being done. To improve the health of the people by pursuing excellence in healthcare. How do you do? What do you do when you pursue excellence? What exactly are you doing? So you have to ask that kind of question when you read text. Some words are so good to use, like pursuing excellence. Oh, we are actually pursuing. It's the material process, right? Pursuing is like following in search of excellence. But are we told exactly what is being done here? We are not, right? So this kind of thing, you have to raise questions when you read, right? So this is what I do and how I use transitivity in my analysis. So I study, I examine, trials, right? How people use language in the courtroom, right? And I look in particular at the opening statement. You know that in an American trial, there will be two sides, right? There would be the prosecution side. So prosecution in a trial, in a criminal trial, for example, right? That will be the prosecution side. So prosecution side wants to prosecute, right? Want to prosecute the defendant, right? And whereas there's the defense side wants to defend the defendant, right? The accused person, right? And so the defense side has the goal to lessen the guilt, right? Lessen the responsibility of the defendant. Whereas the prosecution side will have the goal of foregrounding or highlighting the guilt or the crime that person has done. Okay, so two different goals, right? So I look at how these two sides use language, right? And I use transitivity to analyze what they say, okay? So the opening statement is the first occasion when the jury and the judge will hear from a lawyer, right? So this is meant to be a roadmap. The opening statement is like a roadmap telling the judge and telling the jury who did what to whom, right? So that's the first time. So it's important because the judge and the jury do not know anything. So they need to be persuaded, right? And they are like the groups or the parties that are waiting to hear from both sides, and then they'll make judgment that way, right? So in this case, language is so important, right? Because by considering, by judging what you hear from each side, you can say this side is right and this side is wrong. You can render the verdict, right? So it's important to persuade. So each side has to use their linguistic resources, linguistic choices to highlight their case, right? To say that, oh, the defendant is really wrong. Whereas the defense side would say that, oh, the defendant or the accused person is not so wrong. He has some reasons to commit the crime and so on, right? So that kind of thing. So we can look at this as a very critical period where people use language, right? So this is what I found. So I look at the opening statements, right? And I found that they control linguistic patterns to highlight their case. So in case one, which is a sexual abuse case, so somebody raped a girl, okay, involving a man and his 2 stepdaughters. And I found that the prosecution foregrounded the defendant's active role in the crime using a lot of material processes. So you highlight that the defendant is so wrong, right? While the defense team backgrounded the material processes, backgrounding the agent, thereby backgrounding the responsibility, right? And I did some statistical analysis. So you can see that in the prosecution side, the material processes are high, whereas in the defendant side, the material process is so low if you compare these two, okay, in terms of numbers. Now, let's look at some examples. So pros here is the prosecution side. So this is how they phrase things. The defendant, the name, okay, let's say it's Mr. X. Mr. X, having Mr. X tell her, so tell is the verbal process, right? To inspect her for wood ticks. You know, wood ticks like insects or bugs that can bite you. So the guy who raped the girl asked to inspect the body for wood ticks that might be biting the girl, right? He made her get undressed and get onto bed. So you can see a lot of material processes here. Inspect for wood ticks. He made her, causative made, right? Undress and get on the bed and so on. And has struck, threatened with a gun, threatening to kill everybody in that restaurant, pointed a gun at her, who went to Arby's, threatening to kill everyone there, punching their mother, first kill the family pets, the ferret, like squirrel, the parrot, and the chinchilla, and so on. You can see a lot of material processes here, right? Struck, threatened with a gun, threatened to kill everybody, pointed a gun at her, and kill everyone again, punch their mother, kill the family pets, and so on. You can see a lot of material processes here, and you see the defendant as the agent, right? So this is a way to highlight the crime, the impact of the crime, or the process of the crime. Whereas for the defendant side, you can see this is how that side used language. If this were really going on, this, what is it? We don't know, right? If this were really going on, so this, what is it? So not even an agent here, just using a pronoun, right? All these things, what are these things, right? The raping, the killing, the threatening, right? So all these. So you can see that he skipped or he omit the naming of things, right? Telling exactly what these things are. Happening over this long period of time in the household, wouldn't the mother know it was going on? What is it, right? So the raping, right? So you can see that he intentionally or subconsciously even not mention, right? He didn't mention the exact acting, the exact agent, right? Michelle Yorkshire said that the events occur in December 2001. Events, what are those events, right? In response to defendant's act of what he did. Defendant's act, name, Mr. X acts. So what are those acts, right? We don't even know. Mr. X is not an agent here. The incident of killing the animal took place. The incident of killing the animal, who did it? Where's the agent? It's gone, right? So you can see that this is a different strategy to background the agent, right, and the responsibility. So you can see that they choose their linguistic choices according to their goals, right, in the trial. Case 2, assault and murder case. The prosecution, again, to highlight the guilt of the defendant, right? I had the night out right there on the step. The defendant, Mr. X, got the knife out and used deadly force. So material process, again, used deadly force, got the knife out, and he gets a knife out and uses it to kill Mr. Y. For example, you can see a lot of material processes going on. But let's see, what do I have? Whereas in the defendant side, what do you have here? He's in the process of taking that knife out. In the process, this is a relational process, right? He's not acting, but he's in the process. So you can see difference in terms of representation. He's still on the step. Again, relational process telling the location, right? He takes out his knife and brandishes it, and then things start again. So in this case, even though you see the material process, right? He takes out the knife and brandishes it, but you don't see he's acting on somebody else. Just take the knife out, he's acting on the knife, and he brandishes the knife, right? It doesn't have the goal, who is the victim, right? Whereas in the other case, you see the victim, right? You see the goal. And what do you have here? He brandishes it, and the victim ignores it, and so on, right? And he starts lashing out with that knife. Again, you don't see the victim being represented here because it's not in the interest of the defense side to represent the victim. Okay, so he has to background it, taking it out of the conversation. You might see some mental processes from the defendant side. What he feared? Did he fear great bodily harm? Yes, absolutely. What was going through the defendant's mind, Mr. X's mind, as he was being shoved onto the ground and beaten by what they perceived as two men. Why do we have to know about, or why do the juror and the judge have to know about the defendant's state of mind or the mental processes? Because by explaining the mental processes, the defense side could lessen the guilt, right? The seriousness of the issue of the crime, that showing that he was motivated to do the crime because of XYZ, because of his mental processes. His own statements show that he actually intended to inflict body harm, like actually intended, that's the mental process again, right? So you can see the use of mental processes from the defense side, whereas you don't see that from the prosecution side. And finally, relational processes and circumstantial phrases from the defense side. He's down on the ground, he's still on the steps. Mr. X is right there in this area. He was knocked down on the ground. You see a lot of relational processes and circumstances. Why? Well, because he wants, the defense team wants to highlight the fact that the defendant here, Mr. X, is on the defensive side. So he used the knife in order to defend himself rather than to kill the victim, right? So all in all, you can see that they select different linguistic resources. They select different processes in order to highlight something or to background something, right? To foreground something and to background other things, depending on their goals, right? So the prosecution side, because that side wants to highlight the crime, wants to highlight the seriousness of the crime, so he has to use a lot of material processes with human goals, with human beings as the goal, whereas the defense side would do the opposite, which is to background the action, background the agent, and to highlight the circumstances, to highlight the mental processes that the defendant was in, and so on. So you can see this might be a useful way of examining the kind of the beliefs that people have, or the belief that different sides have when they use language. Okay? So what we'll do, so to sum up here, when you look at different processes, you look at what processes, right? First step, you look at what processes are being used. In a clause, right? Because again, a writer or a speaker can choose from 6 different types, right? Sometimes you can choose the existential process in favor of the material process. For example, if you say there was a murder like this, it's just like the murder just happened by itself, right? Whereas if you have X murdered Y, this is another way of representing the same thing, but when you use this material process, you know who is the agent and who's the goal, right? Or you can say Y was murdered by X. Y was murdered by X. Or you can even leave it out. Y was murdered. Backgrounding the agent. So there are many different ways of highlighting things and backgrounding things. Using the processes, different processes might be one, and even using the same process, the same material process with different kinds of position would highlight something and background something else. Okay? So first you have to look at what processes are being used. Mental processes could reveal the internal kind of view of people, which in fact you don't have access to, right? How could you know what another person is thinking? You never know. But when you use the mental process, it could draw up some attention. Okay? So, and then when you see a process, right? So you see who are involved. So the second step is who are involved in the process. In the processes. So name the processes first, and then who are involved in the processes, the agent, the goal, the sayer, the verbiage, and so on. Okay? So who are involved, and are they backgrounded? Are they included or are they not included? Are they foregrounded in the front or are they backgrounded? Right? So look at those participants. And third, when you look at the participants, are they, so you look at who are involved, right? Are they activated or are they passivated? Remember the terms that we looked at earlier today. Activated actors are actors who act, who make changes, who cause things to happen, right? Who are powerful because they can make things happen, right? They can make things happen. They can cause change in the world. They can act on other people, okay? And the passivated agents are just different. They might be able to think, they might be able to move, but they cannot cause things to happen, right? Just like Bella that we looked at last time, she could move, she could think, but she cannot protect other people, which is traditionally the role of men, for example, right? And so when an agent is activated, you can ask whether he has goal or not. Whether he's acting on a goal or not, right? So yes or no, right? So look, if you remember the examples that I just gave, the defendant brandishes the knife, or he used the knife to kill someone, right? So if there's a goal, then the goal is highlighted, and the action is also foregrounded, right? But if there's no goal, it means that the action and the goal are downplayed, meaning not highlighted, right? And so just ask these questions. Is there a goal or not? If there is, then the goal is highlighted and the action is foregrounded. Whereas if there's no goal, both the action and the goal are downplayed or backgrounded, right? On the other hand, if you have a passivated agent, an agent who doesn't cause things to happen, what you could do is to ask whether is the passive voice or is the active voice, right? So if it's in the passive voice, then in this case, there's no agency, right? If in the active voice, there's some agency. Some doesn't mean that it's highlighted, right? If you compare this to the activated agent with the goal, then that's like the biggest highlight of things, right? The biggest for grounding technique. But when you have a passivated agent with the active voice, like Bella could move, Bella could trail through her life, and so on, there's some agency. She could still act, but is not acting on other people or not causing things to happen, okay? So there's some agency there. Okay? Whereas if it's in the passive voice, there's no agency at all, right? She's being acted upon, right? Like, you know, Bella was protected, or Bella was helped by Edward, and so on, right? Protected, there's no agency, right? On Bella, especially, okay? And on Thursday, we'll come back to look at harder cases in transitivity analysis, where you will see that people could use even a higher level of syntactic patterns to highlight or foreground things. We'll focus on the first page, okay? So we'll focus on the first page. The first page is a news piece that was back in 2008 or 9, and it's about how the British soldiers bombed the Taliban groups, okay, in Afghanistan. So you read about what happens when they bombed the Taliban soldiers, okay? So if you look at the headline is on the top, right? Our boys blitz Taliban bash, okay? So you see that. I'll show this on a slide just in a minute. So you see that blitz, you know the word blitz? Blitz is a verb or a noun. It means bomb, to bomb. Blitz is a verb or a noun, and it means to bomb. So they bombed Taliban bash. Bash means party. So the boys here going to the British soldiers, right? So our boys, British soldiers, bomb Taliban party. Okay, bash is a party. Okay, so in the headline, what do you see as in terms of process, in terms of verbal process? You see a material process, right? Our boys, agent, blitz, bomb, which is the material process, and Taliban bash, which is the goal. So that's a material process. So could you look through the story and see what processes are being used in the case of British soldiers and Taliban, and put those processes in the table below, okay? So processes of British soldiers, for example, you can put blitz, right, in the table. So you could put blitz in the table. So I have two columns in the table, right? So I have the processes of the British soldiers, BS, British soldiers, and this is the Taliban soldiers. So in the first case, in the first line that you see blitz as the process, right? So you say material like this, okay, Matt, and then I just I don't know, indicate that it's in the headline for ease of reference, okay? Like that. And when you come down to the second one, British commandos launch a devastating blitz, a devastating bomb, right, on Taliban. So in this case, you have another example, right? Launch a devastating blitz. So you can say launch here, which is a verb, which is a material process again, which is in the lead. We call this the lead. The line below the headline, we call it the lead into the story, into the details of the story. So you have launch as the material process like that. And because the subject is British commandos, and which refers to the British soldiers, right? So we put it in this box, in this side, okay? As the evil terrorist refers to Taliban soldiers, right? So we have to look at this side, right? Taliban soldiers. So as evil terrorists held a party to celebrate Benazir Bhutto's murder, right? So held a party and celebrate. So we have held a party and then celebrate. So this is in the lead, right? So what do you have here? We have material process, right? But you can see the difference, right? Blitz on the they blitz Taliban bash. So you have the goal. The goal is the Taliban soldiers launch launch a devastating blitz on the Taliban. You have the goal as the soldiers again. But here, when they say they held a party, celebrate the murder, they are using the material processes, but there's no goal, no human being goals, right? So you can look at that kind of difference. So could you do the rest? We'll look at number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 10, okay? And put the verbs, the processes in the corresponding column of the table, okay? And we only focus here on the two sides, the British soldiers and the Taliban. So other things you don't have to care about. Okay? So you can choose to focus on certain people or certain things because you want to see the differences, right? So for example, you don't have to look at sentence 3, right? Because sentence 3 is the bash was being held. So in this case, there's no British soldiers or no Taliban soldiers involved. So you can look at other passages, other sentences that have that involve other passages that involve the British soldiers or Taliban soldiers. Okay. In passage 1 here, in paragraph 1. In paragraph 1, even though you don't see either any of those sides, the down raid was staged after messages were intercepted about the Sikh knees up in Afghanistan's Helmand province, right? Knees up is an informal word for party, okay? Knees up is like bash, so it's party. So sick is like, oh, that's sick, disgusting, right? So you don't see the soldiers or soldiers of either side being represented here, but because it's in the passive voice, the down raid was staged after messages were intercepted. But you can guess as to who did it, right? The down raid was staged, meaning the dawn raid, the dawn siege, it has to be the British soldiers that did that, right? Was staged after messages were intercepted. Intercepted means to overhear, to seek to hear. So in this case, it's the British soldiers, right, that did it. Even though you don't see that, you can kind of deduce from the surrounding message. But in this case, you can see that the writer wants to highlight the operations, the dawn raid and messages intercepted, right? The interception of messages. The writer wants to highlight the operations that the British soldiers did without highlighting the agents that did it, right? And then the Royal Marines and so on, you could start from that, right? Looking at the verb, what kind of verb is it, and so on, okay? So I'll give you maybe 3 or 4 minutes more, and if you have questions, just raise your hand and I'll walk to see you, and then to help you, I'll come to help you. When you guys classify the processes, we look at the meaning. We don't look at the kind of verb. Okay. So like here, I have 2 versions. Miss Bhutto was killed, and someone killed Miss Bhutto, for example. Yes, I know that this is the first one is the passive voice. The second one is the active voice. But still, kill is the process of doing, right? Kill someone, kill something. That's material process. So it doesn't matter whether it's version 1 or 2. These two sentences are still material processes. Okay, and while the first one is in the passive voice, so you have the goal in the front because she's being acted upon, whereas the goal is in the back in the different version, and then you have the agent here. So when you classify the processes, just look at what type of verb you have. Is it doing? If it's doing, then it's material. Is it thinking? If it's thinking, then it's mental. Is it saying? If it's saying, then it's verbal, right? You have express, for example, express, this is express concerns about. In this case, while it looks like it's a material process, right? Because you do something, you're expressing on something, right? You're acting on something. It's not, because the meaning, when you express concerns, it means you are saying, you are talking about your concerns. So if the meaning is about talking, that's automatically a verbal process, right? So we don't care whether it's a transitive verb with an object or not, okay? When we classify the processes, at least. When we classify the processes, the meaning is important. If it has to do with saying, express concerns, I'm expressing concerns about X, Y, and Z, then that's a verbal process, okay? So we look at the meaning rather than whether the verb is transitive or intransitive when we classify the processes, at least, okay? And in other steps, you can look at whether it's passive or active, where's the goal, where's the agent, and so on. But at first, when you classify the processes, what's important is the meaning. Express concern is not a material process because it has to do with speaking, right? And so on, okay? So that's how we would go about it. Okay? When I do this kind of analysis, it's helpful to have pens or pencils of two different colors so that you could, because typically we focus on maybe two sides or two main agents, right? So you could use a pen of one color to highlight the verbs of a particular side, and the other color to highlight the verb of a different side so that it's easy to see for you when you do the analysis, okay? So to continue, what do you have? If you look at line 2 or paragraph 2, Royal Marines, referring to British soldiers, right? Royal Marines crept into position, right? So we have crept into position. Right? And then, so this is in paragraph 2. Again, it's the material process, doing something, right? This one doesn't have a goal, for example, right? As the fanatics are like crazy people, so referring to the Taliban soldiers, right? As the fanatics partied the night away, so we have partied here, right? As this is from line 2, as the material process again, right? But if you look at the material processes here, they are so different, right? Crept into position is like talking about the operations, right? The military operation. Whereas partied is like no military operation is involved, right? Even though they are both material processes, okay? After Miss Bhutto was killed in Pakistan, in this case, Miss Bhutto, we don't have to consider it because we focus on British soldiers and Taliban soldiers here, right? So we can skip that unless we have the reason to, okay? You can choose to focus on the main characters, the main sides here, okay? Number 3, the batch was being held in ruined compounds a few hundred yards from our boys' remote base in Kajagi. So the party was being held. You can skip this too because there's no mention of the Taliban soldiers or the British soldiers. Okay, so we skip that. Number 4, ragtag Taliban sentries, like the force, the military force, try to hit back. So in this case, we have the Taliban side. So we have hit back, right? This is in line 4, right? And it's the material process, right? So this one involves some kind of military operation, right? But if you look at the first verb, try to hit back. So tried means that it's not accomplished, right? Try to hit back. So not accomplished yet, okay? But the main verb is hit back, right? With machine gun fire, but stood no chance against the heroes of 40 Commandos Charlie Company. So stood no chance. Material process, again, number 4, material process, right? So the hit back, the attempt to hit back is kind of negated by stood no chance, which means there's absolutely no chance, right? And then number 5 is just the topic, right? Bloodthirsty. Number 6, the terrorists were pounded with mortars. Pounded, the terrorists, like referring to Taliban soldiers, right? We have were pounded with mortars. Were pounded. Pounded, to pound someone means to strike or to hit. So to hit with mortars. Mortars are cannon, right? Big guns, cannon. This type of cannon, okay? Mortar. This type of cannon, not the camera type, okay? So they were pounded. So were pounded, that's material process. We don't care whether it's passive voice or active voice, right? When we classify the process. This is clearly the material process in line 6, right? But we know that it's in the passive voice and it highlights the goal, right? The terrorists were pounded. So they are highlighting the effects, right? That they were pounded, right? Number 7, 2 bloodthirsty revelers. Revelers are people who are being so happy, right? So they are party goers, right? So they are happy. They are very happy. Trying to creep towards our boys. So referring to the Taliban soldiers again, trying to creep. Creep with trying, right? So this is 7, which is the material process again, right? Our boy in a trench were spotted by thermal imaging equipment and targeted with a javelin heat-seeking missile. So we have spotted and we have targeted, both of which are material process again in line 7. Okay? They try to do that. They try to creep. They try to do the material process, but they were spotted. The result is highlighted, right? They were spotted and they were targeted. And in number 8, we don't have either the British soldiers or the Taliban, so we can skip that. Number 9, Troop Sergeant Dominic Conway, who directed mortar rounds, grinned. So we have the British soldier here in number 9. Grin is to kind of to smile, right? To smile in a kind of I don't know, facetious way. Maybe this one is the behavioral process, right? Number 10, Sergeant Conway from Whitley Bay, Tennessee, said of the Taliban lair is a cave, right? So number 10, which is a verbal process. Number 9, we missed one, direct the mortar rounds, which is a material process. Okay. So when you look at both sides, okay, now we can do the interpretation and we can do the comparison. Now if you look at the British soldier side, what do you see? A lot of material processes, right? And one behavioral process and one verbal process. Whereas if you look at the Taliban soldier side, we have a lot of material processes and actually a lot of material processes, even almost all. But okay, that's the kind of the superficial similarity, right? If you look at the difference, you see that in the British soldier side, all the material processes involve some kind of military operation, precise military operation. including the bomb, the launching, the creeping into position, and directing the cannon to the other side. Okay? So they involve acting upon a goal and involve precise or sophisticated or well-crafted, well-thought-out military operations. Whereas in the other side, although it's true that we see a lot of material processes, the material processes that we see are only about partying, about celebrating, about standing no chance, about trying to hit back, trying to creep, but just attempt of doing that, effort of doing that without any success, right? Try to hit back, try to creep, for example, right? We see no achievement of any sort. Whereas in the soldier side, in the British soldier side, we see a lot of precision, right? And even in, in terms of the material processes where they are highlighted as the goal, they were spotted, they were targeted, they were pounded. These passive voice constructions even highlight the kind of the precision of the British soldiers, right, and their operations. So you can see that, of course, it's easy to tell that after the analysis, it's clear that this newspaper, at least, or the writer of the newspaper, the writer of this piece, will have to side with the British soldiers, right? And they highlight their actions, the British soldiers' actions, and the kind of sophisticated plans of bombarding the other side. Whereas the Taliban soldiers are represented as people who are crazy, fanatics, revelers, for example, and they can try to do something, but there's no success, and they like to party, and so on, right? So you can see that different processes highlight different things, okay? And by doing an analysis like this, things may be much more clear, become much more clear to you, okay? What I want you to do as homework is to try to read the second piece. The second piece is about, again, news about prison officers and about Muslim inmates. Inmates are people who are in jail, okay? People who are put in jail. So again, doing the same thing, we want to look at how Muslim inmates are represented and how prison officers are represented. And in this case, you might not see a lot of material processes. You might be seeing a lot of mental processes like fear. Prison officers fear that fear is a mental process, right? So let's see how material processes could be used to represent someone as good guys and someone else as bad guys, and so on. Okay, so we'll come back and look at this example on Wednesday. Okay, and on the last page of that handout, you have the answer key to one exercise that we didn't finish in the first week of class, which is about foregrounding and backgrounding and point of view. Okay, so you could use that as the explanation for your the question that we didn't get to finish in class. So see you guys back here on Wednesday.